Okay, welcome to the session on communication and client behavior. Today we have a guest speaker named Ed Coambs. Ed is somebody that has a financial background, and I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But he then went to school and became a licensed marriage and family therapist, and so he really works at the intersection of an emerging field known as financial therapy. As I've mentioned to you during the course of this semester, the value and advice, the reason that it takes a long time is because we're dealing with human beings. And people have hang-ups that prevent them from doing the things that they know they should do. It's really important, and we spend most of our time in this program training you how to give the right advice, figuring out what people should be doing financially. But we really, when we're planning for people's lives, we first of all need to be more holistic than that. And second of all, we need to be able to understand our clients, and we need to understand our own value proposition. The reason that we spend hours each year with clients when we know what they need to do, and we could probably tell them and write a brief email or tell them in 5 or 10 minutes what they need to do and just tell them to go on. That won't be effective. We need to be able to be there to hold their hands and to communicate and to guide our clients through things. And so there's this new emerging field at the intersection of therapy and financial planning called financial therapy, but this is really going to permeate a lot of your careers as you deal with clients and as you get out there. And so I thought, since I don't particularly have any formal training in this, I thought it would be great to turn it over to somebody who does have formal training and is really making his career at the intersection of this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Great. Thank you, Duncan. I appreciate you having me here this evening, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you and your students tonight about the subject of financial therapy, which is something that's become very, very important to me both personally and professionally. Duncan and I have had the chance to meet several times outside of this class, and I'm really excited to hear about the program that you guys have going on here at your school. And I hope that whatever I offer tonight is helpful for you on your journey professionally. I've certainly learned a lot over the last, 8 to 10 years. And so I just want to try to give you a few nuggets tonight that will help you think about your career progression and what you'll be offering as a very valuable service to our community at large. I think Duncan really makes a great point that I see the vision I have for financial planning in the future is that the financial planner will be the primary care physician of people's finances. They're going to be the person that is an expert in many different areas of finance, and they're going to be able to give good advice about how to proceed forward, much like when you go to your doctor for any kind of common cold or illness. You're going to have this base knowledge of how things really work and how they work together. And so you're going to get to really know your clients really well and build a relationship with them over time. That is the role of the financial planner, is to have a long-term relationship with their clients. And so you're in a unique position in this stage of life to be learning these skills. And as Duncan really talked about, unfortunately, as much as we would like it to be the way that we just give them the right answers and they go do it, realistically, we know that doesn't happen. From practical experience and speaking with people to perhaps even your own life, what happens when people just tell you what to do? Chances are you probably don't just jump into feet, and so neither will your clients. And this is where this intersection of financial therapy really starts making a lot of sense, is because therapy is about the process of helping people make positive changes that are in their best interest. And so that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I think we'll go ahead and talk about 3 kind of broad categories, kind of as people helpers, to set the framework for you guys, and these will be what we'll cover tonight. One is just kind of the basic, what does it mean to be a people helper as a financial planner, and what are those skills? We'll talk a little bit about how our families that we grow up in and live in affect the way that we make financial decisions and how that impacts the financial planning process. And then lastly, I will share with you the 6 stages of change that people go through and how we can help people be facilitated through going through that process. So with that in mind, I did want to share just a little bit of my own professional journey and why this is so important to me. I started out as a professional firefighter and really enjoyed that career. And during that time, I started studying and working full time and got my business degree and really took an interest in personal finance. And along the way, I decided to leave firefighting and really pursue full-heartedly financial planning. I just saw that there was such a huge need. And so I ended up working for a company named Vanguard, which Duncan just shared with me will be actually coming to visit you guys this coming Tuesday, I think. And so Vanguard Mutual Funds is an excellent organization for getting training and development. They really have a very strong focus on serving their clients. And so I would certainly encourage you to consider them as a very reputable organization to start your career at, if that's the right fit for you. I worked at Vanguard about 4 years, and during that time, they helped me get my MBA, and then I finished my certified financial planner. And so I really learned a lot technically about how money works, both in the business environment and personally. But the thing that I realized is that while I knew a lot about how money works, I still would go home and have trouble talking with my wife about finances, and I'd have trouble talking with my folks about finances, even though I technically knew what to do. And so that's where I got the idea that maybe becoming a counselor would help me help others make the financial progress that they really needed. I saw that there was a real problem that just because people have knowledge about how something works doesn't necessarily mean they make the changes. And so that's, again, where the financial therapy comes into place. And you, as an emerging professional, with the right skills, will be able to help your clients make the progress that they want. So I hope that kind of paints a little story about why I'm doing this. My own family has conversations and their own financial challenges that I try to work with them on, and I know it's challenging. I can only imagine that for each of you and your families, you've seen good times and perhaps lean times in your families and kind of wondered about why it is the way that it is. A time in college is the time when we're separating from our own families and really trying to make meaning of what we do and why we do it, and kind of trying out, well, mom did it this way or dad did it this way, and now I'm going to try to do it my own way. So with that being our setting, let's go ahead and talk about being a professional and working with clients and how to help them engage in the change process. As Duncan talked about, we can't just give them the right answers as much as we want. And so the first thing as a therapist that I think about when I'm helping people, even when I can clearly see what's going on, is I'm very focused on having them feel heard. So ask yourself, how good of a listener are you? I believe that most of us think we're pretty good listeners. But what I've come to find out is that most of us are pretty poor listeners. And we know that axiom of we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and so we should listen more than we talk. But that isn't actually what ends up happening a lot of the times. Fortunately, the skill of listening can be developed over time, and this is something that as you grow as a financial professional, you're going to want to develop this skill of listening. Because the skill of listening not only allows you to hear what is being said, but to be attentive to what is not being said in your client meetings, when you're meeting with your clients, right? So just think about it when you meet somebody new and you're working with them and they start asking you questions. Do you always tell them everything that's going on right away? Probably not, right? You're not going to be fully transparent right away. It takes time to build a rapport and a relationship. And if there's a level of trust with the person that you're talking with, then you might be willing to reveal more. But as a professional, this is where it's your responsibility to create an environment where your clients can feel like they have the freedom to talk about what's going on in their lives. So practically, how do you do this? Well, it would seem like it should be easy. I'm just going to sit in front of the client and listen. But it's not that easy, because the first thing that we have to do is start to get control over our own mind and our own curiosity, if you will. We have to get kind of control of our head, and we have to get ourselves to this place where we are solely focused on hearing what the client is saying without any of our objectives for getting certain things accomplished. We just want to listen to our clients for what are they telling me? What are we listening for? We're listening for what's really most important to them, but also what are some of their biggest fears and concerns? Because ultimately those fears and concerns, whether they're directly related to finances or indirectly related to finances, will be the stumbling blocks that prevent them from moving forward on whatever financial recommendations you'll have for your clients. So as we're listening to our clients and we're really trying to identify what's happening in them, we have to continually monitor ourselves. We have to increase our self-awareness for what's happening in our head, what's being evoked. You know, so are we getting overwhelmed by what they're telling us? Are we feeling confused? Are we feeling concerned? Are we feeling like we know it all and we just want to tell them the answer? All of those internal feelings that we have are going to prevent us or slow us down from really hearing what the client is telling us. And so that's something that I can't emphasize enough, is learning to listen is a skill that can be developed over time, but is going to be the one that serves you probably most profitably as you do your planning process. Because if you don't uncover the real concerns and fears and challenges, you don't ask the right questions, you're going to find that your clients get stuck at some point in the planning process.
I would say that I can concur with this. In my career, I think when we talked about the steps in the financial planning process, and often I like to ask my students what is the most important step, and certainly there's no right answer to that. But the second step in gathering is gathering information, and we tend to break that down into both quantitative and qualitative information. And it's that qualitative information that we found out about our clients' lives, and there's a real skill set in doing that. And then if you base your recommendations not just upon quantitative analysis, but based upon what your clients really told you was important to them, and then you base your monitoring based upon that as well, then and you really keep that as the framework for guiding the relationship and reminding your clients of what they said was important to them, then I think you can become a much more successful financial planner.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We want to be listening for both that quantitative and qualitative data. And as you were talking about that, Duncan, see, this is where even I, as a professional, continue to have to work on my listening skills, right? Because what was I doing as Duncan was talking is I was immediately thinking about, well, what do I want to respond? What do I want to add? And I wasn't listening to what Duncan was saying fully, because I was excited about responding. I wanted to add something. So even in our interaction with me and your professor, I kind of lost track of listening to what he was saying. I caught a few of the pieces, but I didn't get the whole richness of that. So this just is a live example.
Well, that's because I was mostly rambling.
Well, no, I think you were trying to get to a point, and I was anxious to jump back in. So that's why I say it's a skill. It's not natural for most of us to just sit back and listen. We want to contribute. We want to jump in and add ideas. But when people feel heard, when they really feel heard, they're going to give you the gold. They're going to give you everything. And that's why being a trusted professional is so important, having the best interests of your clients in mind. Your clients will know whether or not you're really representing who they are and what they want, or what your company is asking you to do. And that's an important distinction when you sit in front of your clients. Your clients will have a sense for whether or not you're out for their best interest or your company's in your best interest, and that can be a major barrier to listening. And so that's just something to be aware of as you think about entering the financial services world. Is will you have enough latitude, enough freedom to not necessarily push your clients in any one direction, but rather to allow them to kind of lead you in the directions that they want to go.
So, is in the context of financial planning, is it your experience that being able to truly listen and let the clients lead the direction is the best way to establish trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially in the beginning stages when you're just getting to know your clients, not having an agenda may be the most powerful agenda. And what I mean by that is just being willing to hear from them, hear about what's happening in their life. Now, the reality is, depending on who you work for and where you work, you may have some time constraints and expectations about how quickly people will move through a planning process. And that's all right. I mean, these are all things that professionals have to deal with, is the realistic expectations of time versus what may be ideal. And this is where you have to develop professional decision-making ability. And even the pros get it wrong some of the time. So not that there's a lot of extra pressure here on you to get the listening thing figured out and the timing, but just to be aware of that. And what my context that I think about often now are more of your fee-for-service financial planners who have long-term, ongoing, face-to-face relationships with their clients. And every time you meet, it's important to inquire about the functioning of them, the person. How are you doing? What's happening in your life? What has changed? What's going on for your spouse? What's going on with your kids? What's going on with your parents? How many major transitions in life happened? Because all of that information, while it may seem like small talk, is actually painting for you a very clear picture of what's happening in your client's life and what planning potential problems may be coming up. So let's take the example of a client that you maybe might have that would be younger. They're in their early 30s and they're young professionals, and you're meeting with them and they're earning a pretty good income. And you're in a review meeting with them, and if you didn't ask them some questions about their life and what they're planning, they may end up coming back and saying, hey, you know what, we're really struggling to get pregnant right now, and we're planning on taking $50,000 and going and getting in vitro fertilization or any other kind of pregnancy helping medical procedures. Well, as a financial planner, would it be important to know that? Now, that's a difficult topic for a lot of folks to talk about, but when we know about what's potentially happening in people's lives at different seasons, then we know that we can ask some really deep and probing questions. But that takes a trusted relationship to be able to ask those type of questions. And so context makes a big difference. Context being, where are you working? Who do you work for? What are the expectations? And what are the natural types of relationships? And as professionals, and this is where the family therapist in you really comes out, is we think about in every season of life, people have different joys and different pressures. And so, as college students, you have certain joys, you have certain pressures, certain financial concerns. Right? I would guess that for most of you, even if you're working while you're going through college, you have your primary concern is probably about getting through college and getting a pay raise. I'm going to guess. What are some of those primary concerns for newlyweds? What are the primary concerns for young professionals that have children? At every stage, we want to be educated about what are the different challenges that people typically face, and to be able to ask questions about how they're experiencing that, because that will help us figure out how they're trying to arrange their financial lives and to plan around that. So again, thinking about...
Ed, Can you take us through an example of, you brought up a great example about a couple getting in, needing in vitro fertilization. Can you take us through an example of how you might get to that point? I mean, you mentioned small talk, which can actually have meaning at some points, but I'm thinking of, well, people say, hey, how you doing? And I don't care how I'm doing. My response is always, great, how are you? And so, that's small talk, which achieves absolutely nothing. That particular exchange there. But do you want to start off with open-ended questions and then sort of steer the conversation in a way, but still be open-ended about it? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Duncan. Thanks. To boil it down, I think, in one mind I have Vanguard on my mind. And I don't know that those types of questions would be relevant at Vanguard, to be quite frank. I mean, depending on your role there and the planning kind of context. But if you were in a small fee-only advice firm where there's been long-term relationships with clients and you get to know them, these are the types of conversations you want to have. And so it might be in your first engagement meetings that you talk with your clients about how you work and how you view financial planning from a holistic standpoint. So you have to set maybe some stage and some context before you start probing into people's personal lives. If you were to just jump into that kind of question about, do you have plans for children, or have you had any difficulties, that would probably be a little off-putting. But if you set a safe stage where there's been some rapport built with the client, and you talked about the importance of knowing the details of your clients' lives to help them figure out how to get money adequately set aside to accomplish their goals, then all of a sudden there's real meaning behind why you're asking some of these probing and deeper questions about what's happening in their life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does make a lot of sense. You're doing some things that I just kind of fumbled my way through as a professional as a financial professional, but not a counseling professional, by trial and error. When our students get to my capstone class, they'll see that my coaching during the discovery or the initial meeting, which with clients, is to set some context about the financial planning process, where we are today, and how today's meeting is important. The discovery being the qualitative data gathering process, how that meeting is important for the remainder of the steps in the financial planning process, and so where we're going to go from there. And that we're not going to talk about recommendations today. What we're just going to do is gather, we've got some of this information, here's where we are, here's what we're doing today, here's why it's important, and then then getting into it. So tell me a little bit about whatever subject you do. How do you go into having that conversation after you've set the context?
Yeah, I think that really gets into a pretty kind of the advanced, depending on the planning relationship. It depends. I mean, I hate to say that because that's not really overly helpful, and I understand that. But I think the important point to communicate in this experience for your financial planning students as they're getting started is to realize that there's real value in getting to know your clients and being able to, in that engagement process, in the data gathering process, and talking about how you typically work with clients. And again, I have in mind more of your kind of small fee-only firm where there's an ongoing relationship with the client, not so much situational financial planning, which is a lot of what Vanguard does, is they will collect all the data. You'll say, I want to accomplish X goal, and they'll do this quantitative analysis. And so if you're working for a larger firm like that wants you to stay more quantitative, then you have to be mindful of that from your organization side. But if you're naturally a relational person and you find yourself in an environment where you have long-term ongoing relationships, more in a wealth management type of role, then you're going to get the privilege of having those types of conversations at some point. Does that make sense?
I think it did make sense. So
Hey, Duncan, can you bring your mic back down?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'd moved the mic. Yes, that did make sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So maybe at this point, I would like to transition into kind of away from listening well, and really the point being, it takes work, it takes effort, but we all have the ability to develop that, and over time we can be attentive to that. So that's just a professional skill that we want to have on our radar, is the ability to listen well. The next professional ability that I think is really important for financial planners from a therapy standpoint is really understanding the power of people's family background and the way that that influences how people think about and use money. Not only is it about how people think and use money, but often how people continue to use money because of their family. So going into just a little bit of theory for your students is that in family therapy, we use a model of thinking called systems thinking. Now this might be kind of familiar to thinking about economic systems for your students. That we understand that the Federal Reserve has a certain role in the way that money flows through our economy, that the stock market has a certain role in the way that the economy works, that all these different players are all really interconnected, and that when one does something, something else responds. If the Fed raises interest rates, then that affects bond yields, right? If they lower interest rates, that affects bond yields. If this happens, this happens. That's systemic thinking, that one change in one gear affects a change in another gear. And so when we think about families, very much the same. It's true that nobody operates independent of the rest of their family members. And within our family, we each end up taking on a particular role given our family structure, our family history, what has happened to us, both good and bad. And that colors the way that we see the world, the way that we see money, especially in the context of financial planning. So as we, as financial planners, think about our clients that are sitting across the table from us, we don't want to jump to conclusions about what we see in front of us. The very difficult challenge, and the classic example might be working with a high net worth client and making the assumption that maybe they've always been that way. And yet you continue to struggle with, well, why? I'm advising them that they can continue to spend, they can spend much more money, they can increase their standard of living, but they won't do it. Well, if we don't really know our clients and their background, where they're coming from, we haven't taken time to understand that, we may come to see that they grew up in a family where things were very scarce and they were never quite sure when more money was going to come in. And so they developed an attitude of collection and holding on to money very, very tightly. And they're very hypersensitive to spending any money for fear that they might in the future run out, even when objectively you have crunched all the numbers and there's almost no way that they could run out of money. So that might be one example. Especially in financial planning firms, I think that is often, people that accumulate wealth have some pretty strong underlying motivations and reasons for doing that. And that's not inherently bad. Our goal as financial planners is to help people create financial stability. But I think the other side of it, from a more of a mental health and family perspective, is helping people also enjoy the wealth that they've created for themselves. But what we want to do as planners is be attentive to hearing about their families. How did their families think about money? What rules do they have about how money should be used? When it should be used? Why it should be used? Who gets to use it? Kind of the classic questions I think we learned in elementary school. The who, what, when, where, and why questions. are very useful when we talk about family finances and the messages that we receive. Who made the money in the family? Who spent the money in the family? How did they make those decisions? Why did they make those decisions? See, these are all questions that we can use about each family member that our clients have. And this would be a very kind of more advanced, obviously high relationship type of client. And the context in which we want to really start asking these questions is not the client that's taking all of our advice and moving along necessarily, but when our clients are getting stuck in the planning process, so there's something that's happening there, we can become aware of there might be something going on for them that was informed from their family. And if we can help them just kind of think through that and make some connections, then all of a sudden they can start making some different decisions. So let me give you another example. I was recently meeting with a therapist and talking with her about her spending patterns and the difference between her spending patterns and her husband's. And she was relaying to me that they just had a dishwasher breakdown, and she got an idea in her head that, okay, well, we'll replace the dishwasher. Oh, but while we're at it, let's go ahead and knock this out, replace this, put this in, and do this. And let's just do that. And she was telling her husband, and she was excited, and he was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Then she was done, he was like, you're kidding, right? And she said, no, yeah, we can do that. And then I said, well, tell me a little bit about your family, to the therapist. And she told me that her father had been in construction, and that oftentimes he would get a job where he would have a large inflow of cash, tens of thousands of dollars. But that money wouldn't necessarily last for very long, or it was only for a period of time. And so they would go and do whatever they wanted with that money. But then they would be dry again with resources. So they kind of lived in this, what I would call a boom-bust cycle, where the family would have large amounts of money and then very little money. But when they had a lot of money, they would just do a project. And not just do one little part of the project, they would do the whole thing. And so as we kind of talked about her family history and the way that they used money, she had never really connected those dots. But as she did, she started to realize, oh my gosh, I'm reliving a pattern for the way that my parents made money and spent it. Now her reality is that both she and her husband have very stable income. They don't get large windfalls of cash coming in. They get very stable monthly income. So there's not going to be a time when a large check comes in and they can catch up. So when you have clients that have maybe some spending patterns that are not particularly healthy, we can look back to the family for some potential explanations. And so in therapy, we call this kind of insight-oriented work, where we're helping clients to connect dots and see for themselves why the patterns have emerged the way that they have.
So it's not just about how the current family communicates about money and behaves around money. That is your, the nuclear family that is your client, but it could be about their past histories. And that's interesting because we think about financial planning as about where are you now and let's plan for going into the future. But you're saying it's important to help clients examine some of their family history as it relates to money as
That's
well,
right.
Correct?
So in the financial planning process, I think that we do a great job of trying to understand where are you now and where do you want to go in the future. And for the most part, I think that's the way that we should stay as financial planners. When we need to consider the past, though, is when our clients are getting stuck, when they're not making the progress that they're saying that they would like. That then becomes our big warning flag that something's going on for them. And that there's a good chance that it's something in their past that's reemerging that they may not have even recognized yet. Now, what I'm not saying is that you need to become the family therapist for your clients. But what I am saying is that you can be aware of these types of things and ask some kind of simple questions. And if that helps them make progress, great. But if not, then we need to start looking at, how much pain is this really causing for our clients? And if it's causing a significant amount of pain or distress for them, then maybe we need to talk about getting them some help, getting them to a financial therapist or a marriage therapist or family therapist that can help them work through some of these emotional blockages that they're experiencing. So the warning signs are when clients aren't making progress, then we can take the time to think, okay, what maybe was their family life like, and let's ask some questions. And again, this is where we want to be continually working with our clients and painting the context that we think about not just how their money works, but how they work and they work within their family, because that's really going to drive how they end up spending the money. So another point that I want to make for many clients that will come for financial planning is that they may be crossing socioeconomic levels. So whether you're doing financial planning for the indigent, for those that have little funds, or for those that have significant assets, there's distinct values that typically are associated with each of those social classes and certain rules that govern the way that people use money. And we learn those rules within our family, within the family that we grew up in. And so there is, in the world of cultural diversity, I like to add that social class is another form of diversity, because there's different rules that govern the way that middle class, wealthy, and low income folks think about and use money. And I'm not saying necessarily that any of them are inherently better or worse, but our job as a financial planner is to be cognizant of what social class framework might they be coming from, what rules about money have they learned based on their social class, which was primarily set, their framework, their foundation, by the family that they were raised in. And so this is really a twofold thing. One is about knowing your clients, but before you know your clients, it's taking time to know yourself. What rules and expectations around money did your parents teach you? Because those chances are that wherever on the wealth spectrum you grew up, as a financial planner, you're going to encounter people that grew up in a very different frame of mind, and you're going to work with people from a different frame of mind. And if you're not aware that you have very different rules about the way that money works and should be used in your life than what your client might have, that's going to be a source of potential conflict and tension for your clients.
And lots of times people's story is that their family didn't really talk about money, or that money might not have been a direct conversation. But does that mean that there weren't lessons, implied lessons that were being taught in the family?
Yeah, that's a great point. There are often many more implied lessons about money. I don't know many parents that sit down and talk about the role of budgeting, the role that money plays in our life, how we go about earning money, how we go about not earning money. It more comes through very passive observations or comments that family members may make. An example might be when you drive through a certain neighborhood with your family, your parents would say, "Oh, we could never afford to live there like these people." And what does that communicate about money? Perhaps, at least in my mind, that communicates that our family can't make that kind of money. And there may be some truth to that, and there may not be some truth to that. But it gives you an implied message about money. Money is one of those most powerful communicators that usually doesn't get a lot of words. We more watch and learn from our parents about money. I would say we learn about money through the observation of how our parents use and don't use money, much more than any words that they say. So we watch, what does mom buy when she goes to the store? What stores does she go to? I mean, we're aware enough as young children and adults to recognize that if mom's going into Walmart versus Neiman Marcus, I think that most people have some level of awareness that there's a different economic value there. And so we are learning our class rules based on the context in which we live, the stores that we shop in, the stores that we don't shop in. We're also learning class rules of, by the way, the types of jobs that our parents work in, the type of career tracks that they're exposed to, the peers that we're associated with. Again, all of this stuff is not necessarily inherently good or bad. I'm not saying that it's better to grow up in any one social class or the other. They all have their benefits and they all have their drawbacks. And so I know personally, and from more anecdotally, having grown up in one social class and now being in a different one, that has faced some personal challenges for me because I have at times not felt like I understood the rules by which I should play in this new social class that I find myself in. That doesn't mean that we're not adaptive, that we can't figure it out, but it is challenging to say the least. And so when we're working with our clients, we're going to have assumptions about who they are, where they come from, and why they think the way that they think. And some of those assumptions might be right, and some of them might be dangerously wrong. And so we can use, again, our listening skills and open-ended questions to really understand our clients. And let me just remind you that this is all given within the context of, as our clients may be getting stuck along the way, these are different things to be thinking about. We don't necessarily need to run through a full family history every time we meet with a client. But if we're getting stuck, it might help to start thinking about that and start maybe asking some open-ended questions about family history with money. Another example maybe would be really helpful is I met with a couple, and he was struggling to maintain his professional job and get the certifications that he needed. And there was tremendous pressure on him to start making money as he had a young child and his wife had some medical complications. But he was really very afraid of dealing with money and making good money, which he was capable of doing given his professional background. But what we really found out after talking to him is that his father had a significant economic catastrophe. He lost his business in bankruptcy while this man that I was working with was a young boy. And so they went from one social class to another. And that social class change was a significant event in his life and created a lot of anxiety and fear about making good money. Because ultimately he didn't want to get to that place where he was financially comfortable and then have it be swept out from under him. So kind of paradoxically, or it doesn't make intuitive sense, but he was avoiding becoming more successful for fear of losing it because of what had happened in his family. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. How do you then, do you need to really make any commentary on that once a client tells you that story? Will they just make the connection themselves that, hey, this is why I'm doing that, and is that enough?
Again, it's going to depend. And
for them to make that connection?
The difficult side of the subjective nature of dealing with the human element is we don't always know exactly how it's going to work and what's going to come from it. The most important thing is if people acknowledge these significant challenges in their life from their family experiences, personal experiences, whatever is happening, is to validate, to be empathetic with what they're saying and what that means. And this is, empathy is a major theme within therapy and working with people, is just acknowledging what that was like for them. So for this client that I just told you about, a simple response might be, wow, client, it sounds like that was really difficult and hard for you. And it made you feel pretty overwhelmed. And the client would probably say, yeah, it did. And then you don't continue talking, you just let them continue to talk. Most of them just say, hey, thank you. They might just say, hey, thank you for letting me acknowledge that. They might make the connection. They might not. But that's where it does get a little bit tricky, but we want to just be cognizant that these things are playing in the background of our clients' lives and that they are directly impacting the financial planning process without us ever seeing them. And so and I'm going to continue to say this, when clients are getting stuck, that's when we need to be concerned about what's playing in the background. We don't have to necessarily be trying to look under every rock with every client. Many clients are going to come in, they're going to be well adjusted, they're going to be able to move forward through the planning process, they're going to appreciate the advice that you have to offer. And as long as you're patient with them and kind of pace yourself with the rate that they want to go through these things, it's going to be a lot more effective. Okay,
Makes
so
sense.
We've talked a little bit now about how to really listen well, which starts with getting kind of control over our brain and where we're at and being focused on what is the other person saying and trying to communicate to me, reading between the lines sometimes. And that's a skill that can be developed. We've talked a little bit about our family that we grew up in, that the family creates messages about money that often continue to drive the way we think about it and use it in our adult lives. And I'll just add, I didn't mention this, but when you get to the marital relationship, inevitably you will find that every client set has two different family views of money, and that's the major source of clashing. And getting clients to find common ground on money values will be probably one of the most challenging parts of your whole work, because the wife is going to have one set of goals and the husband is going to have a different set of goals. And getting them to a place where they find agreement can be the most challenging part. But when you get good at that, your clients will be super grateful and also probably very likely to refer, which is better.
Is there, in your experience, I mean, I guess this is somewhat of a stereotype. There's one spouse who is this, who's a spender and is just focusing on the spending. The other spouse may be a big overreactor to that. Is that there may not be their reaction to that may be more harsh than the economic consequence of the overspending. Is there something that you can do to kind of walk people through that, hey, you don't have to agree on every dollar that's spent, but if you can find that common ground for your goals, you can build in that allowance for disagreement over budgeting? Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the real trick is, yes, there is in almost every relationship there's a favor-spender continuum. And I don't know that there's loads of couples. I mean, I think classically we're biased to think that every couple has a spender and a saver. There are some couples that will be spender-spender and some that will be favor-saver. Those are probably a little less common. And most couples are markedly different. But what happens, we find, is that when one person becomes stronger on either the spending or saving side, in response to that, this is kind of that system thinking that we talked about before, is when someone starts spending more money, the other person that has the inclination towards saving will push harder into the saving side of things to balance for that spender. They'll want to save even more, the more that this person is spending. And so we kind of get in this kind of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Who are we going to get to stop spending, or who are we going to get to stop saving? And when we can help them come back to this place of common ground and seeing that there's value in both
spending and saving with their finances, that both persons' role has an important place, it can reduce anxiety in the relationship. The problem is that often one person in the relationship is kind of seen as the bad guy or the villain, and the other person is seen as the good cop, or the police officer that's trying to enforce the rules. And it may be the spender that's doing that, or it might be the saver. But either way, the person that is being made out to be the bad guy, so to speak, is going to continue to experience a lot of frustration. And so you, as a financial planner, when you can acknowledge the importance of some of the things that they're doing, you're not saying permissively, yeah, let's just have you keep continuing to spend money and blowing the family budget. But you're acknowledging that you enjoy spending money, that there's certain things that you like to buy. That person then feels validated and understood, which then brings them into a place where they're able to really look more closely at what they're doing and the impact it's having on the family. How did that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, everybody wants to spend some money
Right.
on some things, correct? And everybody wants a future
Right.
that's good, right? So in that way, it's it can be tricky to say, hey, you can fall into the trap as an advisor of siding with one over the other, and of course the advisors want people to save more money, typically, but it's financial planners, really what we're trying to do is make people's lives better off, and we're trying to help them balance their resources over time according to what their goals are. And so, it is a challenge to help people find that common ground and those joint goals. But also finding a balance of saying, okay, we're gonna build in some room for disagreement. Not two people aren't going to always agree on every single purchase or everything that they decide to spend their time doing. But we can still come up with a positive outcome.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you make a great point about, as a financial planner, we want to be thoughtful of who is our client. Is it the husband? Is it the wife? Or is it the marriage and the finances? And I'm intentional in saying the marriage and the finances, because my view as a marital therapist is that in the financial planning process, you cannot do financial planning just for the husband or just for the wife. If they are married, you are doing financial planning for the marriage and the finances, for the best interest of their marital relationship. What's going to help them bring the greatest level of satisfaction to their family life? And so my point being is, we don't want to take sides with the husband or the wife, even though we're naturally probably going to want to agree with one or the other more. The moment that we start to do that, the other spouse is going to be the one digging in their heels. They're going to be the thorn in your side. They're going to be the one that's going to make it hard to move the financial plan forward. And so we need to have some balance in the way that we work with marital couples. We need to give acknowledgement to both people in the relationship, even if we don't like one of the two couples. And this is a skill that we learn in therapy, especially in marital therapy, is the value of keeping the marriage at the front of our mind. That we may not like one person more than the other, but in the context of our professional role, our job is to help bring that couple closer together and to find satisfaction in their relationship. And so I'm pretty sure that that at least some of the clients, if not many of the clients that you meet with, won't necessarily have a fully satisfying marriage. Now, I'm not asking you to be a marital therapist or anything like that, but I just want you to be cognizant that your clients may not be enjoying their marriage as much as they could, and the finances may be a part of that, even when they have lots of money. Which brings me back to a point, Duncan, that you were talking about. We live in this tension as financial planners of trying to get people to save for the future, and we get them pretty well trained to do that. But the thing that many of our planners will face is this baby boomer generation that's been accumulating assets, and the ones that have been fortunate enough to accumulate substantial assets. The challenge now is going to be to reprogram them into spending. not only will you be challenged into getting them to spend their money, you're going to be challenged in helping them to start working less, to help them see that they don't need to continue to work to produce assets that will sustain them in their future years. That they've reached that goal and they've made that transition, which is a significant challenge that planners are facing these days, is working with their clients that have accumulated substantial assets and getting them to slow down, to pause and enjoy their life. These are the things, these are the skills that if you choose to develop will really distinguish you as a financial planner. When you can help people really live into their goals, not just financially, but emotionally or psychologically, you can help them make those transitions. No computer is going to be able to take that over. And so that's just, again, this is all coming from the mouth of a therapist. So I have my biases, but I just need to point those things out. If we have a little bit of time, I'd like to go kind of that third pocket, which is kind of the process of change that people naturally go through, and how we can have a little framework for thinking about that.
Absolutely, let's do that. I personally would like to come back and talk to you offline about the transition into retirement for accumulators and how difficult psychologically that switch is, because my research is in retirement income planning. So that's something that I find very interesting. But please let's move forward and talk about the behavioral side. So the first question, and maybe this is a question that I should have posed for your class at the very beginning, but all of my work is set on the assumption that people can grow and change. A therapist's view, and I think a planner, is that people can grow and change. People can do good things for themselves when the right environment is created. And so whether we're talking about finances or psychological growth, it's about creating an environment where growth can occur. And we know that if we put the right factors in place, then growth will happen. But that's the challenge. That's the skill as a professional. And so my question to you is, do you believe that people can really change, that people can grow? And if you do believe that, then how does that process happen? And there's a number of different models to consider how people actually go about changing. I'm going to present one to you called motivational interviewing, and it was really developed out of a need for helping addicts come out of their abusive relationships with substances. But the model, I think, can be used for people that aren't addicts, for everyday people that are trying to make change for their lives. And so there's really 6 stages of change. And when we think about change, we don't want to necessarily think about it in a linear fashion, that people go clearly from step 1 and then clearly into step 2 and then clearly into step 3. While we'd like it to be that way, it doesn't always happen that way. But the 6 stages of change from a motivational interviewing standpoint are pre-contemplation. I'm going to give you the 6, and then I'm going to go back and talk about what each of those mean. So the first one is pre-contemplation. The second one is contemplation. The third is preparation. The fourth is action. The fifth is maintenance. And the 6th is termination or recycling. So let's kind of take the financial planning situation in mind with the stages of change. Let's assume that you have a new client that's starting with you and they've never done a financial plan before. You're the first financial planner for them ever. So where are they, do you think, in the stages of change? Well, my assumption would be that they're in that second stage. They're in contemplation. So in pre-contemplation, people aren't even aware that they have a need for a change. They're not thinking about it. It's not even on their radar. And so there's not a lot that we can do at that pre-contemplation stage for folks. But when people enter that place where they're coming to your office for the first time, they're in contemplation. They're trying to figure out, is making this change going to be worthwhile of my time and energy?
or is it going to be too much effort to overcome? And so that's where they're at when they're coming to you, is they're in this contemplation phase of, do I need to make some changes? I think I do. And you're going to collect information that's going to kind of help them make that decision. So the third stage then is, after you've collected that information and helped them thought about it, they're going to be in this preparation stage where you're going to basically be now in the planning stage where you've collected the data, analyzed it, and provided them their advice, the things that they need to do to start getting on track with their finances. And this is a major psychological process for most people, is actually facing the reality of what they need to do. And that can sometimes take a little bit of work and time. And as a professional, again, I would challenge you to think back to what I've talked about from listening. Because as we're presenting our advice, we want to be listening both with our eyes and our ears, watching how they're receiving the information that we're giving them. Because some of it is going to be maybe easier to take than other information. And so the whole time your client is in this preparation, I'm trying to make sense of what the planner is telling me. Does this make sense? What does this mean for me if I have to do this? What are the trade-offs? So one example classically is planners having to tell clients that they need to start saving more money. Well, anytime someone has to start saving more money, it means that something's going to have to change in their life, and sometimes a significant way. And that can be a real challenge for folks. So just as we can be more aware of where clients are at in this change process, that they're in preparation, that it's not going to be easy to receive, all of a sudden we can back off from putting too much pressure on them to make the changes right away. Because it's going to take a little bit of time for them to maybe think about and figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? And I'll give an example at this point in the preparation planning stage. I was talking with a planner who works exclusively with dentists, and he says he has this client that continually overspends, and he talks to them about, you need to start saving more money, these are your goals, blah, 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 blah. And they can't get through this preparation stage. They can't get it around their head for changing. And I said, well, tell me about your clients a little bit more. And he said, well, he's a member at the local country club, and she's into yoga, and she likes to buy these kind of fancy clothes, and so they've kind of got a lifestyle. And moving through that lifestyle, and it would take changing some of that. And there's a lot of social pressure that keeps them doing that. So even though they may, in your office, acknowledge and say, yeah, we need to make that change, we need to save more money to do it, they've got some social pressure that they're trying to figure out. I mean, how do I tell my buddies at the country club that I can't be a member anymore? Right? So again, as a planner, it's not necessarily that you're going to be great at helping them figure out how to have that conversation, but when we have an awareness of the challenges that our clients are having in this preparation stage, it allows us to be more empathetic with them and more understanding. Because we can clearly see it and say, well, this is what they need to do, and it's obvious. And oftentimes, I think clients can see it and say, yeah, it's obvious I need to do that. But in the back of their head, they're thinking, I don't want to have to give up the country club. I don't want to have to do that. But in time, with acceptance and some guidance, perhaps they can get to that fourth step, which is action, which is actually getting the money set aside. And this is where, as planners, knowing those kind of easy ways to help people start saving in this context might be great. And so it might be, okay, well, we need you to be saving $1,000 a month, Mr. High Net Worth client, but let's go ahead and start with $100 or $200 on an automatic savings program coming out of your checking account. And we'll step that up over the next year, so that way it gives them time to ease into the transition and that stage of change. So the fifth stage of change is then maintenance. It's getting used to this new way of living. And that again happens over a period of time. Now the last stage is the most important, but also the most unsettling for many clients. Is inevitably all of us, as we're growing and trying to get through change, we'll have relapses, we'll have setbacks. And maybe as students, you've experienced this. You know you need to study more, and you're working on it, and maybe you're better at studying now than you were in high school, but you're still not getting the grades that you want, and so you're working harder, developing the skills to be a better student, but it's taking time, and you have some setbacks, you get some distractions. The more important thing is that you get back up on the horse and keep going. And so as financial planners, really, then your role becomes an encourager, someone that's able to stay with your clients in this process of change, getting the things done that they want to do. Your job is encouraging them, asking them about, well, what's making it hard for you to accomplish your goals, and then maybe helping them have some strategies. The important thing is not rushing to strategies first. It's understanding what's causing the problems, and then getting to the solutions. But as advisors, our temptation is typically to get straight to the advice. And I think to kind of bring this to summary, as Duncan opened up, is we want to get to advice, and sometimes we can really clearly see what people need to do straight away. But when we jump to that and we don't give them the opportunity to feel heard and understood, that advice is likely going to fall on deaf ears. And so those are the 6 stages of changes. Pre-contemplation, I'm not even aware that I need to change. Contemplation is I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to figure out how it's going to work. Preparation is I'm starting to make the changes, but I'm not fully there. Action, the 4th step, is implementing some of those things that are expected of them. 5th is maintenance, learning how to live with those new changes. And 6th is the relapse or setback. And typically these setbacks are not back to ground zero, but there may be a small setback.
So this is really, I mean, you outlined as this is the process of change. This is how you can affect change in your clients.
Right, and you can help normalize the change process for your clients too. And that, again, that's kind of a therapeutic idea, is this idea of normalizing the experiences that people are going through. Oftentimes, we feel as if we're the only one that struggles to save more money. I mean, maybe we kind of know that other people do, but when we can normalize and say, hey, this is challenging for people, and there's a real process by which people actually change, and you can use that language. You can say that people go through stages of change, and maybe you don't remember all 6 stages right off the top of your head, but if you just use some language talking about in change, there's a normal process that most people go through. And there are stages, and I'm here to help you move through those stages, and we're going to figure out the right pace for you. You know, it can be really frustrating as a professional because we want people to get where they should be quickly, but inevitably the harder we push, the slower things go. And so again, that's another kind of paradox way of thinking, but by going slow with our clients and pacing with them, in the long run, we're actually going to get there much faster.
Wow, this is really good. So we've talked about, and so as we're going over, kind of recapping what we talked about, Ned, I'll ask you to help me as we go through this. So we talked about listening and why that's important. And how you can develop those skills to become a good listener, and how that relates to financial planning and financial advice. And then we started talking about family roles, particularly as it relates to money, both with the nuclear family and potentially when there's some hang-ups, you might need to go backwards in time. Is that
that's exactly right.
Synopsis?
You know, a lot of this. My therapeutic thinking is more focused for your clients when they're getting stuck. If people are making progress, then we don't necessarily, we want to listen to them. Right? That's a given. It doesn't matter who your client is or where they're at. Listening is always paramount. But it's when people start getting stuck that we need to start thinking, what's happening in the background that I don't know?
Okay, so then we get into the family roles, and then you get into. Pardon me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we're having just a bit of a time delay there.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I think, I've lost my train of thought, so we'll just keep going.
Okay, so I was trying to go through kind of the synopsis there. So we get into the family roles and potential money conflict within the relationship, and how you might go about handling that while avoiding some of the traps. And then we talked about the process of change. And Ed, you mentioned before we got started recording that you might have a handout on that or an article that you could see. I'd like to be able to add some tools to that. And as we're going through this recap, I believe that this, in this class, particularly the Intro to Financial Planning, I know it was not on the syllabus. I think that this is just such a critically important ingredient in what we do, that this will definitely be something that I think is very test-worthy, where you're going to want to spend a fair amount of time going back and studying this video and the things that we talked about. But I'd like to get a handout, particularly on the process of change.
I'll send you over my short. It's a one-page outline with 6 stages of change. It gives a little ideas about how to work with your clients through that. The other thing I'll send with you is a short one-pager story about my work with another financial planner and helping him see his role more holistically from beyond just the number crunching investment manager to someone that is really guiding a family and helping them achieve their goals through a long-term relationship, and how that perspective really changed the way that he works with his clients and how he now sets the context of the planning experience with his clients. And so those will be 2 documents that I can send for you after we get off this call.
That's really awesome. I can think back over my career as a financial planner, how if I had some of these formal tools that you've laid out in this hour, that I would have been so much better at my job.
Well, you're welcome. This is a huge passion of mine, Duncan. I don't know if you've talked to your students about the Financial Therapy Association, but that is kind of a growing nucleus of folks that really care about this intersection and trying to figure out how does mental health and financial health come together. And I'm particularly interested in the marital relationship. But the Financial Therapy Association is a wonderful, wonderful group of folks that's really committed to growing the body of knowledge in this field. The other thing I would add, this is kind of a big, just more dream for me for students of financial therapy, is that many counseling programs offer what's called at a graduate level a helping relationships class. And all that class is really about how to listen well, how to ask good open-ended questions, and when to do that. It seems so simple, but it is phenomenally challenging. And yet my experience with listening well to clients creates dramatic change. And this is not a planning story, but I would like to just share this to give an example of how powerful listening can be. I had a young woman coming to see me who, when she first came, would not talk. Literally would not talk to me. She was a high school teacher. She was very, very, very shy, and I was not sure exactly what was going on. And so in the first few sessions, I didn't push. I just asked a few open-ended questions. I let her respond at her own pace. Well, fast forward over 5 to 6 months of time. Now, this is not realistic for many of your planners. I realize that, but I'm making the point that listening has a very powerful way of opening clients up to talking about themselves and making progress. And it's not me making progress for them. It's them making progress for themselves. They have ownership of it. But this young woman started to really open up and talk about her career, talk about her family, talk about the challenges that she was facing and the changes that she wanted to start making. And the look on her face went from a very withdrawn and sad-looking face to one that would have smiles and some energy in it. And so that's the power of listening to people. Many people don't really feel heard. Oh, sure, we know the technical details of their life, but they haven't really felt heard. And So when we listen for the emotion and the nonverbals and are able to start acknowledging that, people open up and they really start making progress towards their goals.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing that story, Ed Combs. Thank you for your time today and sharing your career and your unique experiences and expertise with us. And I was just thinking as we were wrapping this up that this would be great continuing education for advanced financial planners. So you guys are getting your hands on some pretty high-end stuff here, and I'll expect you to know it for the final exam, so that you guys will be ready when you graduate to be great financial planners.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
very much, Ed Combs.
Good luck on your test, everyone.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.